Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
You're listening to the Live to Create podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the official Live to Create podcast coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, Shane Almgren, and I am joined today by business owner, consultant, designer, scriptwriter, and author David Litwin. In the early 2000s, David turned his small design agency startup into a multi-million-dollar business in under 2 years and has worked with companies like IBM, Sony, Hewlett Packard, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and Pacific Bell. David has combined all his skill sets and passions together in his new book, Creative Success, which teaches any business owner or independent business leader how to capitalize on the right brain attribute of the artist, poet, scriptwriter, designer, and musician to produce greater business success and the strongest of referrals. David has spoken at numerous conferences, churches, schools, and summits on issues of creativity, theology, and strategic thinking. David, it's an honor to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
So let me run through a quick laundry list of what you do. You're a designer, you own a design agency, you're an author of 4 books, a scriptwriter, a songwriter, an artist. You have 2 fashion lines of clothing and your own podcast. Have you always been this creative and this diverse?
No, actually, surprisingly, I haven't. When I was growing up, I loved art and artistry and the creative process, but I wasn't really good at all.
That was going to be one of my next questions was, what was your earliest foray into art? Was it drawing and sketching or painting?
I think all of us kind of start with drawing, whether it's crayons or pens or watercolors or whatever. I was very, what you would call left brain and simplistic in my art. I always loved hanging out with people that were artists, like I said, and just looking at what they could do and sometimes trying to emulate it, but never really that good.
So what caused this creative shift?
When I was a junior in high school, I was in a class that was going through a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. It had just come out a few years before that, and the teacher wanted to kind of see if there was any, effectiveness to it. So one of the first assignments they had us do was to draw our hands. And so I drew my hand, and it was horrible. And literally, the teacher looked at it, and she said, "Well, that's a left brain rendition of a hand." Now, I didn't know what that meant, and really back then, none of us did. But the next day, she had us going through the book, draw our hands again without looking at our paper at all. And so I drew a hand, and it was okay. And the next day she had us do the same thing again, only this time we were allowed to look just to make sure the lines were okay. And so when I finished, I had drawn nearly a perfect hand. And I was like, oh my gosh, I showed it to the teacher, and the teacher was like, well, this is great. And I went home that night and I drew hands. I mean, I've never drawn that many hands in my life. Open, closed, clenched fist, whatever, finger pointing. And I took it to the teacher the next day. And that next week in parent-teacher night, I was an example of the success of moving from left brain creativity to right brain creativity.
And it took you how many days or how many attempts from this first massive failure until you got something that you were proud of and she was proud of?
Believe it or not, and this is probably going to be a major endorsement for this book, it was like 3 days. And really, ultimately, what happens, if I can in a nutshell tell you how that works, is you learn to draw what you see, not what you think you see. The left brain kind of compartmentalizes something. So if I'm drawing a finger, it's like I'm thinking finger, 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 finger. But if I'm drawing from the right side of my brain, I'm thinking, okay, what's the shape going here? What's the line going here? What's the textural look of this and that? What's the shading look like? And so I'm not thinking about a finger. I'm thinking about all the components that make up that particular shape or image or frame.
Now, do you think that you picked up on this because you're inherently artistic, or do you think anybody has the capacity to shift like this?
I think anybody has the capacity to be creative. I believe that we're designed by a creator God, and therefore that, if the great creator is a creator like that, then I think he's going to imbue that talent and ability on all of us. I think ultimately, there's certain people that have a more of a creative bent, but really, we've seen now in our society, the barrier to entry for creativity is down to nothing because there's so many avenues in which people can be creative now. And so, back years ago, you could only do, if you were an author, well, there was a limited amount of, books that could be produced, and the barrier to entry was very high. If you were an artist, you don't hear about Joe Sixpack down the street from 1970 getting art. It was the well-known Warhols and Nagels and those people of that day. But now anybody has that capacity with the rise of the internet, with the rise of technologies. I think the creative shift is really moving at a monumental pace today.
Have you ever studied the actual mechanism of bridging the gap between the left brain, the right brain, when people do that for the first time? Is it new neural pathways being formed? What's going on there?
Yeah, it is. Basically, what happens is anytime we commit any sort of action, we build up a synaptic pathway towards that action, and it depends on what aspect of the brain that's built on. So a lot of times what will happen is, like when you're a kid, you're very excited about art, and then somebody comes and shoots you down. Let's say, your brother comes back and goes, "Oh, it looks terrible."
John Lennon said that every child is an artist until someone tells him he's not an artist.
Exactly. And so what happens is you actually starve that synaptic pathway. You basically shove it or shelve it. And you may not travel that direction again, if you will, in your brain. But if you are encouraged, if you are promoted, if you feel safe in what you do, you build up more pathway towards whatever that is. And it really is a muscle. It's amazing how techniques are out there to get better. But and to learn certain things that maybe an artist like a Rodin or Michelangelo would have done. But the ability for anyone to get better and better and better is available because your brain just naturally moves to move to a different level. I remember for me, when I got my first design job, I lied my way into my job. I had no idea what I was doing. By then I was a freshman in college, and I'd been doing art for 2 years then. And but I didn't really know graphic design at all. So I cheated my way into the job, and then I faked my way into working for the first 6 months. So if my art director put a line on something, I worked for a record chain. So, I'd do a sign that said cassette singles, 99 cents, and I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And but if he put a line somewhere, I put a line somewhere. If he did a particular typeface, I did a typeface. And then all of a sudden, I kid you not, it was around 6 months in, all of a sudden, in one instant, this thing clicked in me. And from then on, I never copied him again. It was crazy, but I literally could do anything on my own individually, and my style was, and fortunately to him, got better than him very quickly. And then he didn't like that, which led to some altercations and confrontations in the office. But it was just amazing how it was like the crutch was taken away, and I could run freely. I didn't need the crutch anymore.
That's a little bit of an answer to the next thing I was going to ask, and you can maybe expound on that. When you first saw that left brain, right brain shift that allowed you to go draw the hands, were there other artistic avenues that started opening up at that time?
Not really. I think partly because back then, this is 1980 something, there weren't a lot of avenues available. You know what I mean? Now you've got YouTube, you've got other things that you can do, you've got print on demand. There's a lot of other things that you can do at that point, now that you couldn't really do as effectively back then. So it wasn't until later that I got into kind of a lot of diverse stuff. I would draw kind of diversely, if you will, and try and practice different styles and that kind of thing. But I wasn't really involved in kind of the laundry list, if you will, of what you said for quite a while.
You got into design school. It took you 6 months, to have your aha moment. And then how soon after getting out did you get in? Did you get a job? Did you work for somebody else? What did you do?
Well, that's actually what happened for me. I was a freshman in college, getting ready to potentially go to the Art Institute in LA. And I got my first break as a graphic designer working for that record chain when I was literally 19. And so I just ran with it. So it was either, my art director was telling me, it's like, look, you can go back to school and basically everything that you're taught, I'm going to tell you, don't listen to, or you can stick with me and we can just take this and run. And so I ended up doing that. So I regret somewhat not getting the degree. It's never hurt me. And to be honest with you, if I go back to school, it's going to be for business or history. It's not necessarily going to be for art. I can teach classes now, but I don't necessarily want to go back and, learn from that perspective. But so yeah, I got the break right away, which I was very fortunate because obviously the barrier to entry was a lot harder back then.
So I hear you saying that the best course of action is to drop out of school. Is that what we're preaching?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Just drop out of school, be a bum. Get yourself a YouTube channel. Everything's fine. No, I think that, I've got a daughter right now who's getting ready to go to the Academy of Art College in San Francisco. And I told her, I said, you're going to get out of this school what you put into it. So if you don't have the motivation, you're never going to make it in school. You'll never make it in the business world either. So it's just realizing where you need to be. I'm not saying school isn't essential, but I'm saying it's not as necessarily as important. The good thing is that because we have things like the YouTube and Google and Google and all these things, you can learn things so fast, so quickly now. If you really wanted to become a student of the great, global consciousness, if you will, of creativity, it's all out there for you. I do that every day. If I'm struggling with something, I just go to YouTube or I go to Google and I say, okay, how do I do this? And boom, 20,000 people have already figured out the right way to do it. I mean, it really is. There's no excuse for anyone not to be an expert in whatever field they want to be an expert anymore, because you can do things that could not have been accomplished 50 years ago, and especially 100 years ago. So, and not only that, but you can take all of that knowledge and combine it in new ways and produce something. And that's really where creativity comes out. The creative right brain person does something called, Daniel Pink talks about in his book, called symphony. They're able to see things at a far more 10,000 foot view and connect dots that the typical left brain person doesn't.
Yeah, I believe it was the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer who said, talent hits a target that no one else can hit. Genius hits a target that no one else can see.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's, and I think a lot of times, which kind of ties into that everybody has the capacity. I sat with someone one day and he was asking me, he says, I believe that now keep in mind, this guy, we met him in Florida. He had a daughter who had written the number 2 song for all of Israel. It was the number 2 song under the national anthem in Israel. She was 15 years old when she wrote it. He had a son and daughter who would play not together as a family, but individually in front of the national orchestras of nations. So like the Scandinavian National Orchestra, and she would play in front of, and they would back her up, and she was 9. And he basically said, I believe that everybody in this planet is called to be a genius. And I said, I'll go a step further. I believe everybody's called to be a king, because I'm a believer of the book of Proverbs. And I said, it's out there for anybody to tackle. It's just, do you have the capacity, the bandwidth capacity, and the character to make it happen? And I think that, what's happened in our society now is there's so many deterrents to that. There's so many barriers to entry that have been knocked down, but there's also so many deterrents now to being really creative, which is, everything from, if we want to go obvious, we can talk about the effect of drugs on individuals, or we can talk about the effect of, depression or anything like that. But we can really get into just from the standpoint of, playing video games. And I'm an ex-video gamer, so I'm not attacking it. But, and when you're playing a video game, you spend 250 hours being creative and building something that doesn't exist. And so when all is said and done, you go on to the next, Tomb Raider franchise video game. What did you accomplish versus what could you have accomplished in that 250 hours doing something incredibly powerful and literally shaping, the entire orchestration of a society in that amount of time. So, it's all what we put our minds to. And have to recognize there's things out there that are going to either hinder that capacity or propagate that capacity.
And a lot of people that engage themselves in whatever form of mindless entertainment it is, whether it's video games or just incessant TV watching, a lot of times if you ask them why they don't engage in certain things, they'll just say, I'm not artistic at all.
Right.
Do you think that everybody has the capacity to be artistic or creative?
Yeah, I do. I think that it's all, like I said, it goes back to how were you raised? What's your story? And if somebody tells you, we were all artistic growing up, and and we all believed in certain things. My daughter a couple days ago was just telling me, she's like, Daddy, she's like, I stopped believing in Santa Claus 2 years ago, and because of this and this happened, and so I just don't believe. And she said, so I was telling her about something else, and she goes, well, I don't believe that. I said, no, this is true. And she said, well, how do I know that? And I said, well, because now you're at a mature age, so I can tell you things and not have to, convince you otherwise. I'm telling you the truth here. But she believed in Santa Claus till she was 8 years old. And there's nothing wrong with that from that perspective. But, when you get shot down or you get told you're not worth something, you shut something off. And then it really becomes an issue of, you have to fight your brain. Going back to the right brain, left brain thing, you have to fight your brain to get it back because your brain shut it down. So it's capable of doing it. And that's where, anybody who, and I'm going to promote this book one more time, but this Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain book, I've seen images of people over and over again that had done mediocre work day one. And by day 5, they were like incredible artists.
So what would you say are your average listener that's tuning in right now who says, I'm not artistic, I'm left brain, what can they go do immediately to start forging the shift?
I think, for me, and like I said, I've seen it happen so many times that I think it is powerful. I would seriously recommend, I wish I could get like a stipend for this or, royalty for this, but I would really recommend going out and getting that book because I've never seen anything that's been that powerful. Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I think her last name was Edwards. But the other thing you can do is just be conscious during the day of being creative. A lot of times, being conscious of something allows us to really amplify it in our lives. Ask yourself, during the day, hey, was I creative today? Was there something unique and fresh that I did today that wasn't routine? And so that's one of the ways to do it as well. The other thing that I think from the standpoint of, Aristotle said metaphor is the sign of genius. And a metaphor is the ability to take something simplistic and tie it into something, in most cases, for the real true philosopher, deep and relevant. So if you can become more metaphorical, whether that's in your speaking, that's in the stories you tell, whatever it ends up being, but that there is a valid point to what it is you're saying and you're being able to couch it very simplistically, that's another real powerful way of starting to move to the right.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about being in a creative business. There's obviously a difference between running a business and being creative in a business. So for someone like you who's doing both, you have to marry the left brain and the right brain because part of what you do in the morning, you've got to get up and you've got to draw, you've got to color stuff, you've got to help people design, but you've also got to balance books and manage people. And so let's talk about a little bit about, what's the most difficult thing about being in a creative business when you're trying to do both ends?
That's a great question because I struggle with that every day. I was talking to somebody yesterday and I was like, I'm good at the first 95% of projects. And then the last 5%, I have to force myself. I do a good job of it, but I have to force myself to finish. And a lot of times that actually includes getting the bill out, which is hilarious because it's like, this is money.
That's the best part.
And yet I know, and yet I fight it. I literally do. I'll fight it during the day. I'll like, I got to do this right now. And so, but it's that rudimentary side of things that just doesn't have that creativity to it. And to be honest with you, I'm very blessed that I do 20, 30, 40 projects at a time because I pigeonhole or I piggyback between each one, ping pong, that's the word I'm looking for. Knew it was a P word. Ping pong back and forth between different projects over and over and over again. So I never get tired of what I'm working on. So I think that it really comes down to being disciplined and having a really strong business ethic. I work with a lot of web programmers, and for some reason, I don't know why, web programming tends to be, of all the creative genres, tends to be the least ethical. And I don't know if it's because they're a little more left than they are right, and they're trying to kind of work between both. But, it's one of those things where it's like you have to be very in tune with, okay, this is what needs to get done. This is how I need to get it. You're creative, but you're also very orderly. And that's real hard for creative people to be orderly and to do that. I'm real blessed with the ability. That's why I think I'm a good author, because I can think from the left and right simultaneously.
What do you think is harder for somebody who's really, really gifted artistically to learn the business sense, or for somebody who is business oriented to learn to start being artistic?
I think there's dangers on both sides. I think that it depends on the field you're in. If you're trying to be an artist and you're trying to do the business side, then you're in trouble if you can't manage and marry that. But for the business, well, actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to promote my book then. Now I get to promote another book. In my book, Creative Success, really the whole process of the book is trying to get people to understand how to be more right, even if you are left. So it's tips and techniques and tricks to really help you begin to think like an artist, whether or not you're an accountant or a pharmaceutical rep or in logistics or whatever it is you're doing. Because ultimately, I believe that, as we've moved in the last 40 years from a left brain to a right brain society, because of all those technologies and stuff that I've talked about and a number of other different things that I describe in the book, you need to be thinking more right. So I'd say ultimately, it's probably more important for the left to think creatively in this era than it is necessarily for the right to be thinking business, unless you are in the business of creativity.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, David, you've written on some very diverse subjects, from the creative to society to technology to theology and philosophy. When did you start down that path of writing? Have you always done that?
No, actually, I haven't. It actually came out of what I did, which I don't necessarily recommend everybody do, but I did a 2-year, what I called a media fast. And I shut off the television, internet, video games. I was a pop culture glutton before that moment. And I was basically everything you talked about from the standpoint of not doing what was necessary to be creative, even though I was still running a design agency. But, time with my daughter was her watching me play Splinter Cell on the PS2. And I watched 5 hours of television, and I shut everything off. And basically it was fascinating because I poured myself into literature. I poured myself into the Bible, poured myself into the book of Proverbs specifically. And within 6 months, I read 75 books in about 2 years. But within 6 months of doing this, people started asking me where I got my philosophy degree, which I didn't have. And I was, started speaking at conferences and in front of business leaders and just all sorts of stuff. And the best way I can describe it is that I disconnected from the noise. And I just began to hear kind of a smaller voice. Spiritually, we call it the spirit. Some people might refer to something like that as the muse. I think Stephen King talks about it that way. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but.
So tell us your definition of the noise.
Yeah, sure. I think the noise is, for me, from a spiritual standpoint, it has to do with kind of the distraction, if you will, the distraction from being all you were created to be. And you can look at that from a spiritual perspective in a lot of different ways. But it really is, we all get stuck in routines. We all get stuck in regimented systems. And in many cases, those regimented systems are based on noise. They're not, I love that song by Switchfoot. It says, if we're adding to the noise, get off this, turn off the song. And I think we get stuck in such a routine that is in many cases designed to keep us there. And so when we get out of that, when we break out of that, and one of those ways I would say is the noises can be those video games that feel like you're accomplishing something and you're not really going anywhere. There's a lot of other things that, the noise can be, I talk about it from the standpoint of, hindering creativity from, a lot of times you see, like, I'm a classic movie fan. So I'm a Cary Grant classic comedy, and you watch a movie like Bringing Up Baby, or you watch a movie like, That Touch of Mink with Cary Grant and Doris Day. It's some of the funniest writing you could ever possibly imagine. And it's clean as all get out. Now, I'm not talking about just censoring stuff. I'm saying be creative in what you're doing. And a lot of times people now are just, it's noise creativity. It's like, it's not even funny. It's just there for the sake of being there. There's no creative aspect of the humor. And it saddens me because I think that we as moviegoers, we tend to go see films that have they're devoid of creative content. They're just, they'll swear for the sake of swearing or whatever it is. And again, I'm not trying to get moralistic about it. I'm just saying, be creative. When you strip out, it's kind of like a writer who has to get rid of, of adjectives and adverbs when they write. When you strip all that stuff away, you have to get really precise and really concise really quickly. And I think that a lot of times we tend to go back on certain standards and just go, well, this is how I have to do it. I can be very formulaic. And so formulaic can be anything from, the same formula to a movie script to the style of comedy or whatever it ends up being. And I think we need to get back to being really creative. And I think it's possible.
I'm with you. And I didn't actually do quite the media fast that you did, but I remember it was probably about 8-9 years ago. We were watching Fight Club one night, and they were talking, Tyler Durden's character it was Edward Norton's character. When they moved into that dilapidated house, that the electricity didn't work, he said, after 30 days, I didn't miss television. And I'd gone to sleep that night thinking about that and was wondering, is that, because I had my shows, I had to watch several hours a day. I was like, I wonder if that's true, that if you didn't watch for 30 days, you wouldn't miss it anymore. So as a social experiment, we just disconnected it, and it stayed disconnected, and I got on YouTube and I taught myself graphic design. I'm self-taught. I didn't go to school for it.
That's awesome.
And that's, I'm running a design business now too. So I completely endorse that disconnect, turn off the noise mentality. And that's always my first piece of advice to anyone, that number one, before we talk anything else, turn off your television.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a lot of, and not to disparage television, but there's a lot of writers of movies in Hollywood that don't watch TV because they just don't. They go back to classic movies, or they'll go to current movies, but they don't watch television. And I think television's gotten better. You know what I mean? They would definitely say they don't watch reality television, especially. But television's gotten better with what we can see now on things like Netflix and the level of talent coming both back from a directing standpoint, from a writing standpoint, and from an acting standpoint is super strong. But it goes down to, just real quick, if I can quote a scripture, it says that, in the Bible, it says all things are lawful, but not all things it says profitable. And I actually changed that word to powerful. And so when I talk to people, I said, look, you can do anything you want. The question is it powerful? Is it going to accomplish something powerful in your life? If it doesn't, then why do it? Now to say that, I'm, watching more television now again than I had in a long time, because I kind of got out of that, and I know I need to get back, somewhat in it. But I do know that during that period of time, I've spoken at conferences and in front of major business leaders and, a lot of different people in a lot of different arenas because of that media fast.
And you see a distinct tie-in between creativity and spirituality, correct?
I do. I absolutely do. And I think that, a lot of times what happens is that people try to insert creativity into spirituality in ways that are kind of abrupt. So, for instance, you might have somebody go to a church service and they've got somebody painting in the front of the room. And, it's part of the overall aesthetic experience. There's nothing wrong with that. But creativity and spirituality are completely intermingled. I mean, when you are painting, you're in a spiritual zone, if you will. And so that's why I think that, jumping ahead from the standpoint of what I believe, that I think that art itself can be devoid of that, like that spiritual essence, whatever you want to call that from that perspective. But I think a lot of times that people create out of despair rather than out of inspiration. And that's not an attack on the artist. It's more of an attack on the society, I think, is that we breed despair and then we produce aesthetics that are a reflection of that despair.
Well, we get emo music out of it.
We do. And, ultimately, I have a friend of mine who is trying to, she had a son of hers commit suicide. Sorry to get deep real fast, and so she's trying to get music, just, all that type of music banned. And I said, I don't know if you can't ban it. I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to, you're not going to be able to change the First Amendment, but you have the capacity to say something like, hey, these lyrics talk about suicidal tendencies, or they talk about whatever, and let people make a decision from there. But I think that's a responsibility. Everybody kind of says, hey man, this is my art. Don't mess with my art. And you don't have to, I'm not evoking a, church takeover of art, but there needs to be some sort of like standard of saying that this is to build up, not to tear down. And you can do that in a way that's, you can tear down. I mean, I have a quote which says that leaders are readers, but writers are revolutionaries. And you can create a revolution. You can tear something down. You just don't have to tear down people, I think is the way to do it. You can tear down ideologies. You can tear down, preconceived beliefs, dogmas, whatever. But when it comes to harming people or bringing people to appreciate the negative, if you will, I think that's just a slippery slope. It's just a hard place for me personally to say, oh, I support you.
So true or false, all art is good art?
I think it's false. I think all art is artistic. I don't think all art is good art. Because of that very reason. And again, it doesn't boil down to morality. It boils down to humanity, I think, is really kind of my look at it. So, for instance, I talk about this in one of my books, the typical, this is kind of a moralistic mindset versus the culture. So the culture puts out a show that's very evocative sexually, right? And they come back and so now the moralists get on their bandwagons and they start attacking the show for being overly sexual. And, this is wrong, and God said sexuality is wrong, premarital sex is wrong, and yada, yada, yada. And the producer just comes back, or the director just comes back and says, look, we're just showing what's out there today. I mean, this is what kids are doing. This is whatever. This is kind of the XYZ model that comes back from the standard cultural
Or just the
thought.
Mirror of society, not the creator.
Yeah, it's just a mirror of society. Jack Johnson says that, I just point the camera at what the people want to see. It's a two-way mirror, and you can't hurt me. Or you can't blame me. And the reality is that, because I think from a strategic perspective, so the strategic answer, not the moralistic answer, is, of course this is what society's doing. But the problem is you're not showing the end result of those actions. You're just showing the glorification of the beginning of the actions. You're not showing the consequences. So you show the consequences on your show, and then we'll see if people still embrace it. And I think that's where bad art happens, is that bad art eliminates the reality of the
repercussions,
the full aspect, the full experience of whatever it is. It either anesthetizes it, it fails or fears to go there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think if people did that, if we really showed like the depth of certain things, I think we wouldn't have the situations we have in our culture today.
So you wouldn't have to censor things, but we could slap like a warning label on that says, warning, this content does not show the consequences or repercussions of the material inside.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily have to do that in everything. Like, I think from the standpoint of suicide, I think that's a crucial one, because that's taking the life of somebody. And when you're producing art, you're producing quote unquote art that encourages that, I think that's something that's, getting pretty severe. But I don't think we necessarily need to label everything. I just think we need to hold people accountable and basically go, look, show your sex on TV. Just show the consequences of it afterwards. You show the consequences of the unplanned pregnancies and the venereal disease and the infertility and the depression and all that type of stuff. You're not going to have a show for very long. You know what I mean? And people aren't going to do, because what happens is we live in a fantasy world. We live in a world that basically thinks it can act like what it sees on television. And then it goes out and experiences those things, and then it gets affected by those things, and then it gets like depressed and diseased and despair. And so what does it do? The only thing it can do is run back to the very thing that caused it in the first place, which is go back to entertainment, because now at least I don't feel as much pain as I'm really in.
And it just creates a great cyclical.
It's a great cyclical system, man. And so that, if you want to capitalize on it, that is where the noise that's where the noise like rests, if you will.
So shutting that off, that's, do you see that as the biggest hindrance to creativity?
No, I think that the biggest hindrance to creativity is a lack of empathy towards humanity itself. I think that the hater's gonna hate mentality, I think, is hurting everybody. I think that basically, empathy recognizes that everybody has a story. What polarization and what hinders creativity is that we don't recognize, we hit each other in immediate moments and we judge each other in that moment. And so whether it's the 16-year-old brother telling the 12-year-old kid or the 10-year-old kid, hey, you're not any good. You're not good at this, you're not good at that, whatever that ends up being. And then they go out 20 years later and they start attacking somebody else. It's very easy to be negative, because negative does not require creativity. It doesn't. It's just a teardown. You have to be creative to build somebody up. You have to put effort into that. I can say you suck real easily, but I have to know you to know how to influence you in an inspirational way.
That's great. There's one of the people that I'm trying to get on the show is David Wong, who's the executive editor-in-chief for Cracked magazine, cracked.com, and he had written an article several years ago called 6 Harsh Truths That Will Make You a Better Person, and it's gotten so many hits that they re-release it every year right around New Year's, and latest count, it was up to like 25 million clicks. And his whole premise is there's so many people, haters are haters, because hating on something is easier than creating something yourself, and it's a whole lot... you're not putting yourself out there. When you create something and you put it out there for other people to judge you. And it's, it feels a little, you're unguarded. And some people would rather sit back and say, well, I could have done better, or that isn't very good, but it's something that they didn't do. And so it's sort of a defense mechanism to justify why they're not doing anything. And it's one of the reasons they're not happy with themselves is because they're not making something. They're not producing something.
Yeah, this gets really philosophical really fast, but essentially ego kills creativity, because when you run in that narcissistic lane, when you are so fearful of critique, you won't do anything. So, my wife and I, we often talk, she's not an egoist in any way, shape, or form, but she has a hard time with what I do, because she goes, well, if they don't like it, then, what's wrong with them, or how do you deal with that? When somebody says, oh, I don't prefer that design. I prefer, you go in a different direction. And I go, because I don't have an ego, because it's not central to me to be right. And the ego, it's on self-preservation. So the ego has to be right. And if you can't crush that in your life, you will never be as creative as you have the capacity to be, especially in today's world. Because today's world, everything's open for critique. And they'll turn on you in a micro moment. So, I think that that's ultimately where our society is in, when it comes to technology, is in a very dangerous place, because people produce content. I'm not even saying just artistic content. I'm just talking Twitter. So let's just say they produce content on Twitter that has the capacity to stay with them now for decades and decades and decades. They speak it in a micro moment, and it carries on and on and on, and it has the capacity to be judged, critiqued, analyzed, whatever it ends up being. And they don't realize how dangerous and damaging that has the capacity to be.
So you're saying think before you tweet.
Absolutely. And then ultimately, think about what you're doing creatively. My motto is live inspired. And so I want to build everybody up that I come in contact with. And I came from a very egocentric life. But when I realized the fallacy of that and the danger of that, it allowed me to shift and become a totally different person. So I went from a very sarcastic individual who tore everybody down for the sake of building me up, to the type of person who doesn't care what you think about me. I want to know how to build you.
You said live inspired. That idea translated over into some of your more recent fashion work, did it not?
It did, yeah. I actually have a line of clothing called Inspired Fashions. And so I basically it's not a religious per se line, but I basically made the declaration that I wasn't going to do anything that was negative or had a negative connotation or was polarizing or was whatever. And I think a lot of times, even especially in religious garment wear, it turns people off because it's either polarizing in content or it's exclusionary in content. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do stuff that really brought people together, and in certain cases may use, I have crosses in some of my designs, but it's all done from a very artistic standpoint, and there's no judgment in it. And I think that's key.
And people can go there and check that out
at www.inspired-fashions.com.
All right, we will definitely link to that. I wanted to talk a little bit about branding for a second. More so than when you're doing any other forms of art where the goal is to express your own ideas. Branding is all about expressing someone else's idea, and it's often an idea that they're not entirely sure of yet. So you have to kind of help them figure out what it is they're looking for. And it's expressing an idea for them that, in theory, they have to live with forever. So what is your process for doing that when you're branding a company?
I love the way you said that, first of all. I have a very detailed process. For 10 years, literally from 10 years prior to now, I drew really pretty pictures that my clients liked a lot. But there was no metrics of gauging whether it was successful or not. So I have everything from what is called a needs-based analysis questionnaire, which is 40 questions to get to know the philosophical mindset of the client, to a logo brief, which lets me know the aesthetic desire of the client. And then through that helps me kind of come up with a final, like I always have, when somebody tells me an idea, I always have an immediate, or tells me their brand or their company, I always have an immediate thought. And so I'll usually go with that, and then I'll go through, because I just want to get going on something. So I'll start immediately with my thought, and then I'll take a look at all that other content, and then I'll design 2 other designs to kind of match up with that. But really, you're very right. It's you're designing something they may or may not know that they want. And so the greatest moment for me is literally when somebody cries after seeing one of my brand designs, or usually it's brand designs, because basically the comment they get back is, oh my gosh, I have envisioned this for decades or for 2 years or whatever it ends up being. I've never seen it until you just showed it to me just now.
So yeah, that kind of reminds me of the videos of people who get like their eyesight for the first time and see one of their loved ones that they've known all along, their eyes haven't laid on it yet. Yeah,
it's a powerful moment. It really is, and it makes my month every time I have kind of something like that happen. But it's funny because we are paid. We have to monetize a blank screen. That is a hard thing to do. When you're producing a widget, you know how long that widget's going to take, what it's going to be, all the materials necessary to create it. And, and it's very formulaic and rudimentary. And you can kind of plan, if you're smart, you can plan how to make that widget a success. But we have to start with a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen. And it doesn't matter what creative aspect you're in, whether you're a songwriter or scriptwriter, whatever. You start with a white something, and you have to monetize that. And so that's a difficult thing to do, because basically I'll tell a client, okay, this is going to take X amount of dollars. And I really don't know if I'm going to produce in that time frame what needs to be done. Now I have a track record of success doing so, but there's no guarantee. Every single time I do something, there is no guarantee that particular time it's going to come out exactly the way I want, the way the client's going to want, etc. So that's probably one of the toughest things in the creative world that people don't get and don't understand, is we have to monetize blank.
Is that the most challenging part of going from a blank screen to something they love? What's the easiest part of that process for you, and what's the hardest part?
Easiest part is the initial coming up with the idea. For me, I'm able to, like I said, when somebody tells me their idea or business or whatever, I immediately, I mean, it's almost 10 seconds I've got the thought. Now, in certain cases, I don't produce that thought. I let one of my other designers design it, but because they may be better at something, whether it's illustration or font or whatever. But, you know, I know where I want to go. I think that's probably the easiest part. The hardest part is when you don't know where you're trying to do, or you just don't have that idea, or you're slogging through a project and you know you've got to finish, and yet there's nothing in you that wants to continue. And you want to get on to the next thing. And that's very easy for the creative person to get stuck in that rut. And that's what kills agencies, I believe, or small agencies where it's just like one or two people and they're basically like, I don't want to work on that anymore. And then they lose the client.
And we rely on somebody giving us feedback or direction. And I'm sure you love as much as I do I don't know what I'm looking for, but I know it when I see it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is the hardest thing to... You know, that's why we do what we do, because I know, and usually what happens for me is I will know something is going to work for a client, and I know they're going to like it just because I think I have a pretty good aesthetic. And so I can do something and go, yeah, this is going to work. And I've been able to do that across everything from songwriting to script writing to just general art. You know, I'm blessed with that ability to be able to. I'd be a good A&R guy if I was working in the music industry. I could song plug really well, but it is that difficulty of like, well, you know, you didn't really hit it. It's like, well, you didn't really tell me what you wanted either. Well, you know, and I don't have that happen very often because I have planned and pre-planned in the beginning moments. So really what happens was, for instance, the logo brief is I sit the client down and I go, okay, what style do you want? What look do you want? What type of logo do you want? What colors do you want? What font types do you want? So when they come back and go, well, that's not really exactly what I was looking for, I go, well, no, this is exactly what you said you wanted based on your criteria. So it helps me out immensely.
Puts the ball in their court to be better communicators.
Absolutely. It puts the ball in their court to be better communicators, and it ultimately protects me when they come back with some sort of subjective, you know, declaration that doesn't gel to what they've said. And I think that's the difficult thing, is that's why my wife would never be in this field, because it's based on subjectivity. And so you can't guarantee somebody's going to like something. It's you know, it's a 1-2 punch. Not only do we start with a blank screen, but then we can't guarantee that when we create something great, the client's going to like it, because it's all subjective. So the worst part is, you know, I put out I have another thing that I'm doing called Artography prints, which is kind of these glamour fashion images. And so I put out a Facebook post a couple days ago with 4 different color choices and said, okay, whichever one gets the most votes, that's the one that I'll end up choosing. You know, it's different colors of the garments the girl was wearing. And it's like everybody came back diverse. I like number 1. Oh, number 3 is great. Yeah, like nobody. I mean, there wasn't like a consistent. You know, this one rose to the top. It was everybody was all over the place.
25% across the board.
Pretty much, yeah.
Did you come up with a winner?
I have to basically go through and tally everybody now, and I just haven't had a chance to do that because I've been so busy. But no, I think it's moving in the direction I was hoping it was going to move, but I just found that really funny. So
this Artography prints idea of yours is fairly new. Where did this idea come from?
It came out of an epic fail, actually. I was, being a graphic designer, you don't draw anymore because basically your art is very simplistic anymore. Everything boils down to the simplest shapes. And so I hadn't gotten out a pen or ink or anything like that in decades. And so I said, well, I wonder if I can do something using kind of Photoshop, because I didn't want to didn't want to whip out the art brushes. But I said, I wonder if I can create something. So I grabbed an image of a girl that I liked and just the composition of the picture and started drawing it in Photoshop and sort of trying to do layer on layer, and it came out and I finished and I'm like, well, that looks horrible. And so I ended up saying, well, maybe I can turn it into a Nagel. Patrick Nagel was an artist that did some amazing work in the 70s. If you remember the Duran Duran Rio cover.
Oh, yeah.
He actually did a lot of work in Playboy. Don't say yeah on that one. And so I loved his work, always had, ever since I was a kid. And so I kind of turned it into this nagel, and it turned out really good. Well, I showed a couple of them to people on Facebook and other social media, avenues, and then I started doing a couple more, and pretty soon people were like, "Man, I love these." So I turned it into a kind of a commission-based business, and so it's artographyprint.com. And then from there, I said, well, this could really work as a fashion line, since I already had another fashion line. So I found another high-end producer and created a fashion line. And you can get the link off of artographyprint.com. So it's just allowed me to kind of do some really cool, creative. In fact, actually yesterday, I got a Facebook message from a guy who was a former student of Patrick Nagel, who actually said, "I love your work. Patrick Nagel would have been proud of this." And said Patrick actually believed that every decade someone would kind of rise up and sort of take his style.
And he just found you randomly on Facebook?
He found me randomly on Facebook because of a group that I'm part of, a kind of an artist community on Facebook that I'm part of. And I thought that was fantastic. And he basically said, "You have a fantastic collection," and actually said that you've really enhanced the look, which is, I think, what Patrick Nagel would have been most impressed with, is that it's not a copy of Nagel, it's Nagel inspired.
That's got to feel good.
It does. It really does. But ultimately what feels good too is, when I design one of these prints for someone, it's one thing to have somebody cry over a logo. It's another thing to have somebody get excited about seeing their own face or, composition recreated in this style and go, "Wow, that's me. Like, I didn't know I looked like that," or "That's just such a beautiful rendition of me." And that is just an amazing thing. That fuels my week as well. Just to be able to show the beauty of someone in that capacity.
So people can wear their own face on their own shirt.
They could if they wanted to. I've really kind of more done just kind of imagery than just using their faces. I don't know how narcissistic somebody wants to be.
I want my face on the back of my shirt so people following me know who they're following.
That's it. Jack Johnson says, "I wish you had eyes in the back of your head so I tell you that you looked good as I walked away." Yeah, I think for somebody who's like a rock star or something like that, having like a cool rendition of themselves on a shirt makes sense.
All right. Couple general creative questions for you. You personally, you're out in public and creative inspiration hits. What do you do in the moment to capture it?
I hopefully have a journal with me at all times. That's my goal. So that if any thought comes, I'm able to write it down. Any idea comes, I'm able to sketch it. My wife and family just got me a new journal, so I'm very excited about kind of filling in the blanks on this new one. And that's it. Because usually what happens is it'll go like a dream. You know what I mean? It'll go as fast as a dream goes. And then I'm sitting there going, "What was that?
It was
again?
brilliant.
What?
It was the most money-making genius idea I ever had, and it's gone."
Exactly. I've literally been in the middle of dreams, been cognizant of being in the dream, saying to myself in the dream, "This would make a cool movie," and then trying to making sure I remember it when I wake up so I could turn it into a film.
And did that succeed?
That has. Ironically, actually, it was very funny. I had a dream once about a guy who gets framed for a murder in San Francisco, and he escapes by going through a sewer drain. And when he gets away from the people, he ends up coming across a homeless community that's living in this underground. And they beat him up and destroy, he's a Brooks Brothers kind of guy, and they destroy his suit. And when he finally gets out, he realizes everybody's after him because the police are after him as well because they think he's the one who murdered somebody. And realizes that he looks like a homeless guy because somebody hands him $1. And so the rest of the film, he goes around as a homeless guy trying to solve his own, framed murder situation. And it was great. I woke up, I wrote the whole thing down, wrote all the scenes out. Loved it because it was kind of like a social consciousness film as well. Like he realizes that it's like, hey, it's not easy to be homeless kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's not just something that you can just do on the side. And And then around 5 months later, I'm reading Premiere Magazine, and Shaq had just done a movie called, I don't remember, it was the one where he played a wizard, or a genie. And somebody had...
And you're referring to the thespian Shaquille O'Neal.
The thespian Shaq, yes, exactly. Shaquille O'Neal, absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm. And so somebody said, what movie should Shaquille O'Neal do next? And somebody wrote, there were famous directors and scriptwriters that were writing into this thing. And one of the writers wrote, I think Shaq should do a movie where he's framed for murder and has to go around living as a homeless person. And I was like, well, somebody else had my dream.
And did you go out and try to pitch your idea to him, or did you just chalk that up to you guys both ate the same bad Chinese food?
No, I've had that happen before, though, and that's the thing about be very careful, because I've had scripts stolen from me. So just be very careful who you show certain stuff to in your creative process.
Are you more of a night owl or an early riser?
I'm an early riser. I used to be a night owl. In fact, actually, I used to have friends that would boycott hanging out with a group of guys that we ran around with back in California, because they were like, I don't know how you can stay up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and still get work done in the next day. But I married a beautiful woman who was going to bed at 9 o'clock every night. So to be in bed with this beautiful woman and her still be awake required me to go to bed at 9. So I have slowly become a 9, 10, even 8:30 sleeper. So I usually get up about 5 o'clock in the morning and get a lot accomplished, especially now with these artography prints. I usually get up, do a print before 8 o'clock, put it up on social media, and begin my day of designing.
This is a question for writer David. Are there any minimal standards as far as writing, page count, word count that you hold yourself to when you are writing?
Yeah, for writing, if I'm writing a book, believe it or not, I can actually write 10 to 15 to 20 pages in like 2 hours. When I was in school, I dreaded writing the 1,500 word, essay. And now 1,500 words gets done in like 20 minutes. And it's like, I needed to write a blog post. You know what I mean? It's like, it's way too long. So I joke about it in my Creative Success book. I said, I didn't mean to write books. I meant to write blog posts. But they turned into, essays, which turned into the length of mini books, which then turned into the length of books. So I had to do something with them. So I just published them. So yeah, I think that every day I'll make sure that I'm writing. But there are, when I wrote Creative Success, I wrote that over my wife's vacation to Arizona to see her dad, and literally wrote it in like 130 pages in like 2 weeks. And then I sat on it for like 2 months and didn't write another page. And then had a conversation with someone that, because of that conversation, it sparked where the last 2 chapters of the book needed to go. And then I wrote those last 2 chapters in like 3 days. But it was pretty fascinating how that kind of worked in that moment. So I actually have a book that I'm getting ready to publish, which is a really heady philosophical, theological concept that I took 9 years trying to write and never finished. So it's all over the gamut, but usually I write pretty quick.
David, if you had one piece of advice to give someone who wanted to sort of follow in your footsteps, just as a creative professional, what would it be?
Pursue anything and everything. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do it. A lot of it, what is that? That's that 90% inspiration, 10% perspiration. That's what creativity is. When I got my first job as a graphic designer, I was 19 years old. It took me 6 months of calling 2 times a week, every single week. By month 4, everybody that knew me said, "You're not getting this job. Like, give it up. Like, this is not where you're supposed to go," kind of thing. And I kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and I got the job. And if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't pushed, we probably wouldn't be having this podcast.
What single cautionary tale would you tell somebody to dissuade them from following in your footsteps? Or would you?
I think if you're not good at business, if you don't have that ethic, if you're lazy, this is not the field for you, because it's too easy to not do the things that are necessary to make sure you're successful. And so a lot of times people just basically, they never get their businesses out of their closets because they never do the work necessary to make it bigger. So if you're just going to be mediocre, I don't think that creativity is the right avenue for you.
Is there an amount of money that someone could offer you to stop being creative and take a desk job?
No, not at all. I don't think there's enough money somebody could offer me for taking a creative job inside a company.
Wow, that's bold. All right.
I don't know.
I like that. All right, that brings us to our final questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
If your job only paid the bills and nothing more, would you still continue to do it?
I absolutely would. I get to do what I love across so many different disciplines, and there's really few that are fortunate enough to do that, so I really consider myself blessed.
What talent or skill do you not have that you wish you did?
So many. I am amazed at all the talent that people have in this world, whether it's like artistic or it's athletic or it's dance. I wish that, and I think anybody really has the capacity to do that from a young age. I really wish I would have brought myself into everything. So I think for parents now, it's get your kids involved in anything and everything they can. Push them to be experts in all of it. Because I think you really have the capacity to do it. So that's kind of where I wish for myself. I wish I was a good dancer, and I wish I'd love to be a parkour guy. That would be so much fun to me, although I probably would regret it at the age of 50 when you can't walk anymore. But at the age of 20, would have been a blast.
I would have taken parkour as well, or break dancing.
I can see you doing it, bro. I definitely can.
Fill in the blank here. I am a success if I
impact the life of one person.
And conversely, I am a failure if I
focus on myself and I'm not focused on others.
What's the single best piece of advice that you followed to get to where you are today?
Like I said, never settle. Always push your boundaries. I've written 4 different books and I've changed my writing style in every single book, which is really tough to do, but I never wanted to settle. So I'm always trying to find new ways of innovating.
What piece of advice are you glad that you ignored? Somebody said something that maybe they thought they were looking out for your best interest and you completely disregarded them to get to where you are today.
As a creative, you're going to get that a lot. So never listen to the naysayers. I love watching shows like Chopped on TV. I'm a big Food Network junkie. And you'll get somebody on there who's like, I was trying to be a lawyer and my parents wanted me to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to get into food and they hated it, so I'm trying to prove myself to them by being on the show, kind of thing almost. You know what I mean? If I win Chopped, then that's going to show them and validate what I'm doing. And that's a tragic place to be, because it's like, don't ever say to somebody, well, you need to be this, or I don't think you can do this, or whatever it is. Always encourage anybody to do anything and be anything they have the capacity to do, and never listen to somebody that tells you you can't.
What character trait do you like best about yourself?
Like I said, my motto is to live inspired, and I'm really grateful to be an inspiration to a lot of different people. And it's not just an inspiration where my ideas are of benefit, but that I really push others to be their best selves, or at least I really hope so.
What character trait do you like the least about yourself?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'm 46, I'm about to turn 47, and I don't always feel like that age. When I was growing up and you look at somebody who's like 45 and you're like 18, you're like, man, they're so old and mature and, whatever. And there's a lot of times I don't feel that way. I feel like a kid sometimes.
I'm still surprised they let me have a driver's license.
It is interesting because I talk about it this way. I say maturity isn't acting like, mature. Maturity is knowing when to act the appropriate age. And so you can be an 18-year-old in a room where that's appropriate. But if you're an 18-year-old in a room where you're supposed to be 45, then you're immature. So, but I kind of have a young-looking face anyway, so I don't know if that works for or against me.
If you could suggest one piece of self-improvement that everyone on earth would adopt, what would it be?
Empathy. We need more empathy, and especially now, man. We've got, we can't get started politically, but there is very little empathy going on right now in in our political discourse today. We have to be able to recognize that everybody has their own story, and that we have to celebrate both the past and present stories of the people around us and not judge them for whatever they've been through. We could literally transform this entire world if we cared about people's stories.
Fill in the blank. I believe every child should have the opportunity to...
I think what I said, accomplish anything they want. I think that we miss it from everything from socioeconomic factors where people can't do and be part of certain, curriculums and that kind of thing because they just don't have the wealth to be able to get the right, students or the right training or mentoring. I think it's all, in many cases, it's all ruled. One of the books that I want to write is a book called Bowing to the God of Money. And how so much of our society now is stagnated because of the love of money. And it's not money that's the root, as scripture says, it's not money that's the root of evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And so when people love money, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies, it's the Monsantos of the world, it's the political systems, whatever it ends up being, it's the educational models. When it's about the love of money, then it just eliminates possibilities for people. And it amplifies only a small select group.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
I really don't think I need one. I don't think that necessarily, but I do remember that I used to fly in my dreams. And that was a very cool thing. I loved flying. Ironically, when I first started flying, it was like swimming in sky. So I would kind of move my hands together. So it was very slow flying. But as I got older, I began to kind of do the whole Superman sort of thing. So
you would take
I progressed, if you will.
Fast flying over slow flying.
I will definitely take fast flying over slow flying. Absolutely. It's very hard to jump off a cliff and then swim your way up. So,
if you could have dinner with anyone, alive or dead, who would it be?
Dead, it would definitely be Solomon. I love the book of Proverbs and his wisdom. The whole media fast, I became the philosopher, if you will, because of that. Alive would absolutely be Jack Johnson, the singer-songwriter, and I've quoted him probably 10 times in this talk. He is one of the most profound and prolific thinkers on this planet today. And as he would say, I'd like to sit down with him and discuss why it's time to broadcast really his true revelations or insights, or what he calls lyrically his thoughts, to somewhat of an asleep world. And if you really understood and ever spent time talking with me, what I just said makes a lot of underlying sense.
An hospitable nearby planet has been discovered, and you have been recruited as one of the best and brightest to help colonize it. You can take any 3 luxury items with you that you wish. What are they?
Besides family, my Bible, some sort of drawing mechanism, and a typewriter if there's no electricity.
All right. And finally, you've just won a Lifetime Achievement Award, and we want to hear your acceptance speech. There's no music to cue you or rush you off the stage, so you can get to all the thank yous you need and any personal causes that you'd like to champion. This is your moment.
Honestly, in that situation, I'd say I'm really honored to be sitting in front of people who have been impacted in some big or small way by what I've ever done or said. I hope that I've been an example to you and how to build up others and push them to really their creative and intellectual and spiritual limits. I don't really want to be honored for what I've done, but for who I am. I want to be someone, I've talked about this before in messages I've given, I want to be someone that others want to be. Not just someone who people want my stuff. I want to use my stuff, whether that is my creativity or my brain or my thoughts, just to make a difference. The greatest compliment I ever get is when someone says to me, what you said 6 months ago, 2 years ago, whenever, it changed my life. And from that moment forward, I've never been the same. If people were still talking about me and really not me, but my thoughts and actions 100 years from now, I'd consider that the greatest reward.
Well, David, that's all I've got for you today. You are off the proverbial hot seat. Just wanted to say thank you again for joining us, and it was a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks, Shane. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm excited for what you're doing for this whole kind of 30-day creative summit. So I'm looking forward to not only being part of it, but being an avid listener as well.
Sounds good, man. Have a good one.
You too.
Once again, that was business owner, consultant, designer, scriptwriter, and author David Litwin, author of Creative Success. You can contact David for branding and design work at purefusionmedia.com. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today. You're listening to the Live to Create podcast, and this is Shane Almgren reminding you to dream big, be inspired, and live creatively.